Welcome back, everybody, for our final session. Next up is Debora Heard. Debora is a PhD candidate in anthropology at the University of Chicago, specializing in Nubian archaeology and Egyptian history and language. She is the organizer and a founding member of the newly launched William Leo Hansberry Society, which is committed to providing African descended people pathways to careers in ancient Nile Valley and Northeast African studies. Let's welcome Debora and also Sydney Pickens as moderator to the screen.
Hello.
Hi, Debora. How are you?
I'm fine.
Good.
Thanks for asking, Sydney. How are you?
I'm okay. I'm a little nervous, but we're going to roll with it. I'm excited for our conversation today.
Yes.
Thank you, ASOR, for having us on to talk with Debora Heard. We're really excited to get into this conversation on Black and ancient history, disciplinary divides, and a call for change. Really briefly, my name is Sydney Pickens. Like I said, I'm an archaeology educator with Archaeology in the community, and that organization has had the privilege to work with ASOR over the past couple of months. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but this is our time with Debora. So we are going to just hop right in with you and ask what got you interested in Nubian studies and in ancient African history more broadly as well.
All right. So I should mention that my undergraduate degree is in political science. So it has nothing to do. And I actually started out in engineering. So my path was not a direct one. I attended a HBCU. For those of you who don't know the acronym, that's a historically Black college and university, Tennessee State University in Nashville. After that, I went to law school and decided that that was not my lifelong career. But while I was there, I got the opportunity to actually see Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael. One of my friends took me to see him lecture at Dillard University. And that was really the turning point. I just decided that I wanted to go into African-American studies. But I went ahead and graduated from law school. I practiced for a while and I absolutely hated it. And so I decided I need to pursue my passion.
Yes.
I don't need to be stuck in a career trying to just go after making money. So I went to Temple University because that was the only university that had a PhD in African-American studies at the time. But after getting my master's, I decided that I wanted to get a second master's. So I went into anthropology with the intention of just getting a master's. But and mind you, most HBCUs do not have anthropology as a program or a department. So this was my first time even taking an anthropology class. So
what was that transition like for you? Oh, sorry.
What'd you say?
What was that transition like? Let's continue what you were saying.
It was interesting. So I will go back to that because it was a different way of thinking than I had been accustomed to. So, but within anthropology, I decided that I wanted to explore archaeology because one of the things growing up, I was always interested in watching, television shows about archaeology, especially on the African continent, but I never saw anyone that looks like me.
Ever. Yeah.
So I'm like, you're on the continent, but there's nobody that looks like me excavating. So I decided that I wanted to explore archaeology as a career. So after I actually transferred after about a year at Temple because I needed funding. And so I ended up at the University of Chicago. And while I was there, so after I finished taking first year classes that everybody has to take, that was our first time to, take classes outside of the department. And I was not sure where in Africa I wanted to focus my excavations, but I knew that I wanted to take a couple of classes in Egyptology just because I was there. And it was being offered. It's like one of the few schools that has Egyptology
program. Yeah.
So I started taking classes in Middle Egyptian. And when we actually started translating text, that's when I ran across the Nubians. I was like, the Nubians, how come I don't know about them?
Yeah.
They actually ruled Egypt. How come I don't know this history? And that started me on yet another. If there is a theme that you're starting to detect in my story, is that if there is no one doing the work, or if I don't see anybody that looks like me, that's the way I want to go. So if everybody's going left, I'm going to be the person that goes right.
Yeah.
So that turn. And at the time there was, Bruce Williams was at the University of Chicago, but he wasn't teaching classes. So basically it was a course of self-study. So every archaeology course that I took, any class in Egyptology that was related to archaeology, I found a way to make it about Nubia. So during papers, my research was always about Nubia. So basically it was a course of self-study over a course of many, many years. But I ended up, my dissertation focuses on analyzing, comparing, and contrasting temples in Upper Nubia. So looking at temples dedicated to the god Amun during the Napatan period, and then temples dedicated to the god Epidemic in the Meroitic period. And so comparing and contrasting the two sets of temple complexes. But I decided on that Kushite period because there was writing, and it allowed me to use the translation skills that I have been learning, because I did not stop taking Egyptology classes. So actually I've taken so many classes that if I had known better, I would have tried to do a dual degree. But my degree, when I finish my dissertation, will be in anthropology.
Yeah.
But it's at an intersection, and I stress that it draws from anthropology, archaeology, Egyptology, Nubian studies, and African studies. And then no later in this conversation, we'll get to that point of talking about breaking down disciplinary boundaries.
Yeah.
That's really what my work is about doing, is breaking down those boundaries.
Absolutely. Kind of just going right into those disciplinary boundaries now. When you were talking, I'm hearing a lot of words about representation and how much that matters. I'm hearing things about like the intersections of your identities influencing your research, as even so far just exploring all those different career fields until finding the one that felt good for you, and then maybe even bringing some of those into those spaces. But I'm wondering for you, what are, sorry, everyone. I had a little break. Can you talk a little bit more about representation in terms of finding new historical narratives? You said Nubia was popping up all the time, but it never been talked about. And so why is it important for you to be doing this work right now? Yeah, so Nubia, this moment that we're in right now is very key and critical, because of the pandemic, everybody's at home, and we're exploring all of these lectures and webinars online, and people are being able to tune into things that they would not normally be able to access. So I'm thinking about, I've been lecturing on Nubia in Chicago since around 2006. So that was the first time I was asked to do a lecture, and it was on the Nubian queens. So the people in Chicago that are, around the Oriel Institute, University of Chicago, the Kemetic Institute. I did a lecture once at the Field Museum, but people in the Chicago area, they've been getting this history for a decade, well, actually for over 15 years now. And then not only me, but also, like I said, Bruce Williams, he's there. So they've been getting this information. There's a Nubian gallery at the Oriel Institute. So I was able to work on that as a graduate student, helping to reinstall that gallery back in 2006. I love that.
Yeah, so they've been getting that history, but on the larger scale, people across the United States have not. So if you've not been in Chicago, you don't have this history.
Yeah.
So this platform of being able, all these people, expressing, oh, we're interested in hearing different voices. And that's the other critical moment that we're in right now, because there's this push toward including not only representation of people who don't normally work in those areas or not seen as working in those areas, but also those areas that aren't usually represented, period. So Nubia is one of those that's kind of been overshadowed by Egypt. And if you're really not in, you know, the Egyptological circles, you really don't know about it. So this moment that we're in, where people are interested in pulling together these, you know, these kind of like fringe or outside narratives, and then these people who have been marginalized, it's bringing all those threads together and exposing people to, you know, things like ancient Nubia. So this is the kind of critical historical moment that we're in.
Yeah, it's a beautiful, I think, time to, like you said, shift those historical discourses and bring light to these places that we haven't learned their stories and we haven't learned their histories. And I think it changes the way, it'll just revolutionize the way we think about ancient history as a whole by highlighting the history of ancient Nubia. So really exciting. Yes,
it's changing perceptions, it's changing narratives.
Yeah. So just moving on, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about the William Leo Hansberry Society, which you recently co-founded. But before you actually get there, can you talk about William Leo Hansberry himself, who he was?
Yes, so
the challenges he faced as a Black academic.
Yes, so I'm always happy to talk about William Leo Hansberry. This, again, when we talk about those voices that have been excluded or marginalized, you have to go back in history and resurrect those voices that were silenced going all the way back to the late 19th and early 20th century. So, and William Leo Hansberry is at the end of that, but his career and his the things that he contributed to our discourse really has not been told. That story hasn't been told, and the contributions that he made. So again, this time is critical for reassessing. But going back before William Leo Hansberry, because you have to place him within a historical context himself, you know, so there are people in the late 19th century when we're moving toward the abolition of slavery, but they're free Blacks, particularly those who are ministers or writers in the North. Those people are beginning to take on this notion of Ethiopia. In the Greek writings, Ethiopia was the name that was used for Nubia, but it was also the name that was used for the unexplored parts of Africa. But in particular, when they're talking about specific people or specific geographies, we understand that to be Nubia because they're talking about the people right below Egypt. So when they are using these Greek writers to try to reconnect to an African past, because I mean, we always go back to George Hegel, but he wasn't the first, but he was the one that was most articulate in expressing that Africa had no history. So there was this move to dehumanize Africans and to dehistoricize Africa itself. And that included removing Egypt and also Nubia from Africa as a concern or as a historical entity. So you remove the earliest civilizations, and then you start talking about, well, you have places like Great Zimbabwe. Well, that was built by Europeans. So everything that had any historical significance was being written off as being European. That European people came in and founded these societies with these large monuments and things. So these writers like Alexander Crummell, you know, they're looking at this and they're like, George Washington Williams, this can't be, you know. So it was, and during this time period, there's also history was written or viewed within a biblical frame. So, you know, you started out with the Bible, And then you work so the Greeks, everything that's in the Greek writing though has to kind of coordinate with what's in the Bible. But you read about Egypt, you read about Ethiopia, you read about Cush, and they're saying, look, these places are in Africa. These are African people. The curse of Ham was used to try to say that, African people were cursed with black skin and doomed to be slaves, And so they're going back and saying, no, actually that curse is being misinterpreted. The curse is not on Ham, the curse is on Canaan. And if, so, and I think it was Alexander Crummell who names the sons, and he said, you have Mizraim, which is Egypt, you have Cush, which is Nubia, you have Put, which is Libya, and then you have Canaan. And he says which is supposed to be the Canaanite people. Mm-hmm. So he said out of all four of those, the only one that's not in Africa is Canaan, but that was the one that was cursed. Okay. So they're saying even your interpretation of the Bible is incorrect. So there was an attempt to like rehabilitate African history using, biblical sources, using Greek sources, but a big part of that was Ethiopia, which was Nubia. Mm-hmm. So that goes back to the late 18th century, the late 19th century. But going into the early 20th century is when we encounter W.B. Du Bois. And so his line or his contribution connects directly with that of William Leo Hansberry. So William Leo Hansberry, was born in 1894 in Mississippi. His father was a professor at Alcorn State, which is an HBCU in Mississippi. But by the time he's 3 years old, his father's passed away. So it was him and his younger brother, who was born 2 years later. If the name Hansberry sounds familiar, Lorraine Hansberry was his younger brother's daughter. So there's that connection. But his mother is determined that her sons are going to be educated, that they're going to keep that tradition that their father left. So his father left this library of books. So he grew up reading, the Greek and Roman classics. Oh, wow. Okay. So he goes off to high school. He's in high school in Tennessee for a little while. And then he ends up, his last year at Old Atlanta University, which is in Atlanta, to finish his senior year of high school. So from there, he continues at Atlanta University, for college. And I should mention during his freshman year, he's on the debate team. And on the debate team with him is also Walter White. Walter White ends up becoming the president of the NAACP. So it's really, you see these connections, really early in the history, but you see the level of just young people really striving, during this time period, even in the midst of the segregated South. Because this is the segregated South, and Atlanta University is a HBCU in the heart of Atlanta, which was, again, segregated. So after his freshman year, he goes back to Mississippi and works a summer job as students typically tend to do. And at one of the jobs that he was working, they would get publications that he would read. And one of the publications that they received was The Crisis. The Crisis was the monthly magazine that was edited and distributed, written by the NAACP, and W.B. Du Bois was the editor. And so one of the things that Du Bois would include in The Crisis was things that you should be reading.
Yes, I love that. Mm-hmm.
Yes. And so in the things that you should be reading section, and they had new books or books, about history. Mm-hmm. But his book, The Negro, had just come out. And it was the first, well, it wasn't the first because George Washington Williams was the first that actually tried to write a history going all the way back to ancient Africa. But it was the first, in the early 20th century, trying to write that history. And so he was fascinated. He ordered the book. And when the book came, he literally just devoured it. Like, this is the piece that I've been missing. I've been reading Greek and Roman history, but I knew that we had to have a history. I knew that Africa had a history. And he even says, you know, he credits Du Bois and he credits the Negro for setting him on his path to his lifelong, his lifelong career path. So in the back of the book, though, he has a bibliography, and there are, these books that you should read if you want to know more about African history. So he takes the book back with him to Atlanta University to start his sophomore year. He meets up with one of the professors during the first week.
This is all his freshman year?
This is all freshman year.
I love it. Okay.
He goes back sophomore year and he meets up with one of his professors and he says, this book.
This is it.
This is it. You see this list of books? There was like over 100 books. I need to read every book on this list. And the professor says, well, we don't have that. Actually, I don't know any place that you can get all of those books except maybe like at Harvard or, if you go, you have to go someplace like Harvard that would have a large library. So he's thinking, I'm telling him something that he can do later. Hansberry withdraws from school and goes to Harvard.
I'm going to Harvard. They've got the stuff.
This is week 1 of classes.
Week 1.
This is the determination that
the agent
has. He withdraws from Atlanta University during the first week of classes and goes to Harvard and just shows up like, hello, I'm here. What do I need to do to enroll? So he starts taking classes and then he's, they finally work him in. It's funny because I spoke to some, this Harvard group last week, this Harvard alumni group, and they're laughing like, you can actually just show up at Harvard? And I was like, well, you can't do that now. And I'm pretty sure that there were some little complications to him. But classes had not started at Harvard yet. So they were getting ready to start. So that timing was key and critical.
Yeah.
I tell people sometimes things are just in divine order.
Yes.
And looking at that, you'd be like, I'm sure there are people like, what did that boy do? He went to school there and he done dropped out and
hopped over there,
hopped over to Harvard, just gonna show up there, but he was driven.
Yes, absolutely.
And he spent the rest of his life dedicated to doing this work.
And within that kind of same mindset, like he's going to do it no matter what.
Right. So we talk about obstacles. So let me hurry up and try to get through part of the story. So during the time of his coursework, and again, he's coming from a single parent household now because his father's passed away and he would have been, like the primary breadwinner. So there are financial difficulties, because his mother is the primary support. But of course, he's working to try to support himself and, but there's still financial difficulties. So from time to time, he's working and trying to go to school. The other thing though, is like, he's actually taking classes, like you're a student. So as a student, you have a syllabus. And each of your professors require you to read certain things for their class. He's doing that, but he was like, but I got to get through this list. The boy said that these are the books that I need to read to understand African history, to begin my journey. So he has to learn how to balance that because he's really there for the books, for the boys list.
He's there for the resources and the access.
but he's a student, so he has to do the coursework. So he does that. World War I intervenes for a little short time. So around 1920, he's having really some financial difficulties. So he gets his, in 1921, they award him his bachelor's degree. He's a few credits short, just not like major things, but like language study. But they had a thing back then where when men came back from the war, if they were in the main done with the majority of their coursework, they could go ahead and get their degree without, you know, some of the, like, you didn't pass your language exam, but we'll let that slide, so that they could go ahead and work because they had served their country. So he got the degree, and he went to Straight College, which was an HBCU in New Orleans. So Straight College is one of two HBCUs that merged and became Dillard University. So Dillard is still in existence now, but it was Straight College then. So he went to Straight College, and that's really where he begins to create the framework for his course of African history. So he creates really their first ancient history courses at Straight College. During this time, he's also going out and lecturing. So he's lecturing at that time, the fraternities, the Black fraternities, the sororities would often host lectures across the country. So they would bring people in to give just general lectures to the public. So he was lecturing around the country. He even did some work, lecturing work for the UNIA, because Marcus Garvey wanted to recruit him to work for the UNIA. So he was being recruited while he was doing these lectures. He caught the eye of Spingarn, who was at Howard University. And he was saying, look, the thing that you're talking about, this is phenomenal. You need to bring that to Howard. Because what he was discussing, just aside from talking about ancient history, he was trying to build a coursework, a curriculum of African studies that could be replicated at all the HBCUs, because he believed that African history was fundamental to the study or the curriculum of Black students in this country. So that was part of what he was doing as he was going around lecturing. He was talking, but also going around to some of the HBCUs and letting them know, you know, this history and this is what's coming. So he was recruited at Howard, but he was also recruited at his old school that he just up and left, Atlanta University. Atlanta University offered him the chair position. Mind you, he just has a bachelor's degree at this point. But they offer him to be chair of two departments. So sociology and history. They offer him a full-time appointment, which included housing, it included laundry, all of these perks. Meanwhile, Howard was offering him a part-time, a very poorly paid part-time position. He chose to go to Howard.
So he ends up over there, right? What happens? What made
he goes to Howard because Howard is in Washington, D.C., which means he's close to the Library of Congress, the Smithsonian, and he's a short train ride away from Harvard. So everything is, it's part of a larger strategy. But Howard is one of the, one of the premier HBCUs in the country. So it's not like he was giving up a lot. Now he gave up on salary and prestige of being, the chair, but he was going to a place where he had hoped that he would build the model that would be replicated at the other HBCUs. So he was going there to build this African studies curriculum. So he goes there in 1922. That's his first semester teaching. Within 2 years, he's taught over 800 students. 2 years, over 800 students have taken his classes. Mind you, he's part-time. He's not a full-time professor. So that means students are just like,
they're interested, they are an engager.
Yes, and they're just like, probably just like out in the hallway, down the hall, on the floor, against the wall.
They're hungry for this information. They've never gotten it before. So be able to have it so accessible and just in their face, like that has been amazing.
Yes, so he's teaching from what he called the stone tool users. So he developed a curriculum of courses, but he's teaching from the early stone tool users, because mind you, this is before the leakies. This is 1922. So the discoveries of, you know, Homo sapiens in East Africa, that hasn't happened yet. But they do know about the early stone tool users. So he's using a history that starts there and continues all the way through to his time, so contemporary time. So his vision of, or his pedagogy that he's developing, or is really his epistemology of African history, is holistic, that it goes from the earliest times to contemporary times. This is what's missing in our curricula today. And I bring that up because his contributions are not recognized in academia. And it's mainly because he was teaching at a HBCU, so he's not known. Melville Herskovitz is, you know, he's the one that's credited with being the first Africanist in the United States, but he's not. You know, and Northwestern is credited being, you know, having the first, you know, program, but it was not. But he was at Northwestern, which is a predominantly white institution. He got a PhD. He was able to create other PhDs, so he gets that credit. But when you look at the way that the disciplines are divided, you know, so you have African studies, and it deals with more contemporary, you know, cultural anthropology of Africa. Maybe some archaeology, it depends on where you are.
Absolutely.
But the Nile Valley has been relegated to Egyptology. And they don't correspond, they don't talk to each other. That's a problem because, you know, now we're moving into a phase where we're moving towards resituating the Nile Valley within its African context. But in order to do that, Egyptology, Nubian studies also has to be in conversation with African studies, and African studies has to be in conversation with these Nile Valley studies. So yeah, so that's part of where we are with needing to break down these boundaries. So we can't talk about, you know, there's a kind of not only a geographical, but a temporal isolation when you cordon off these different areas and to, you know, relegate them to certain disciplines. Because you don't talk about, it's hard to talk about the rise of the Egyptian state if you're not talking about how African people are migrating across the landscape and how they have been migrating across the landscape, or how the Nubians, and we tend to segregate Nubia and Egypt from each other. But if you look at it in historical context, before there is a quote unquote Egypt, before the unification, they're just groups of people migrating and moving back and forth across the landscape, you know, dealing with the environment and environmental change. But you only get that when you step outside of looking at Nile Valley just through an Egyptological lens. You have to look more holistically. So that is where we're going. But that's what William Leo Hansberry was trying to provide.
Talking more about like making these connections, and you mentioned you wanted to create something that could be replicated or like rebuilt across space. And I'm wondering if you could talk more about the William Leo Hansberry Society and what its goals are for kind of doing that work and continuing within that legacy of building some type of continuity, having those connections.
Yeah, so the William Leo Hansberry Society, we launched on his birthday this year in February, but that was our public launch. But behind the scenes, we had been organizing since July of last year. So we're actually coming up on almost a year, you know, so
Deborah, I apologize. Let me interject for 1 second. Also,
yes.
everyone, please do, if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. We'll be getting to those later on during our talk. Sorry, I just wanted to put that out.
Okay, no problem. So so going back to actually July 4th of last year, there were a group of us, there are 5 of us women who are involved in Egyptology and Nubian studies that were concerned that the Egyptology organization had not produced a statement, a diversity and inclusion statement, given all of the things that had been going on in the past year. So, you know, with the George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, organizations were putting out statements left and right, but the main Egyptology organization had not. So it was, we published an open letter. We had, opened it up for signatures. So and it was less than a week that we had it open. It actually was like maybe 4 days, 4 to 5 days, but we had anthropologists, archaeologists, Egyptologists, actually from all over the country, because we solicited, you know, signatures. So we had well over 100 people to sign off requesting, and we submitted it on July 4th. That's the reason why I remember the date. So, I mean, of course, in addition to requesting that they, you know, produce or put up a statement, we also asked that they develop some initiatives to diversify the discipline, because there are very few people of color in Egyptology, even fewer probably in Nubian studies in this country. Well, we're growing, but I mean, there is no Nubian studies program. So people that are deciding that they want to do Nubian studies have to negotiate or pull together something, cobble together something in another discipline.
Just like what you did, like you have to structure your own learning as opposed to being accessible if they don't make it accessible enough right now. Right.
And so, I mean, but it's Nubian studies isn't accessible basically to anyone in this country because there is no program.
Exactly.
So, but so we got together and we started talking, but again, the pandemic and everything going online has really been, you know, you talk about silver linings. We've been able to take part in different lectures and webinars and identify people that were isolated, you know, so people that we didn't know about around the country and even outside of the country. And so we've just been pulling together people that we see, you know, oh, there's someone in Toronto. Oh, we need to get in contact with her. There's somebody there. We need to get in contact with somebody out in California. Oh, did you see such and so and so? And so basically that's how we've been like pulling together people.
Yeah, I would say
that. So we pulled together these people, but we're also having conversations. And the conversation is almost always the same. I'm the only one in my department. I feel lonely, I feel isolated. I was so happy when you contacted me. I did not know that there were other Black people doing this work. And we're getting that even having like lectures and webinars, we're getting contacted by students saying, first of all, I've never heard of this. Undergraduate students, first of all, I've never heard of this. This is so interesting. Can you tell me more? Oh my gosh, there are Black people doing this work, you know, so then you can start to see yourself in this. So that's part of it. So the Hansberry Society was organized, I mean, based on a lot of our experiences as graduate students. We understand the struggles to even get to the point of being a graduate student in one of these disciplines, because there are a lot of obstacles. And it's not just access, you know, we have access. A lot of it is financial. A lot of it is time. A lot of it is familial support, which you may not have. And when I say familial support, most don't have financial familial support,
Or institution.
but there could also be a lack of emotional familial support. So you end up, you know, because a lot of, I won't say a lot of, I mean, it's becoming less so, but especially for my generation, first generation college students. And if you're not the first generation college student, you definitely first generation graduate student. So there is this, in some families, and especially if you're working class, which a lot of us are, you've come from a working class family, the question is, why do you need to go get another degree? And how is that gonna help you get a job? Very practical minded, you know? I mean, but that's where we come from. People struggled to get to the point where they could send their children to college. So they want to know, is this additional outlay, even if it doesn't come out of my pocket, the fact that you have to continue, you're not being productive financially for yourself. So until you are able to take care of yourself totally, even if I can't help you financially, I'm worried about you because you belong to me. You know? So there's that, you have to kind of justify the expenditure of time, the expenditure of resources. So there are all these obstacles that need to be addressed. So even when you get to that point, and that's part of why there's so few, but then those few that are there, you get there and you're working through it, and it's like, okay, how do I progress in this? You know, how do I get onto a dig? Because again, I said, you know, most universities don't have Nubian studies. So your university does not have the excavation for you to get excavation experience.
And they might have it in, they might have excavation experience, but not in like the region that you want in particular.
Right.
It's always tough as well too, because it's pulling you from exactly where you want to be.
So it's like, how do I make those connections? And since I've started, you know, you could, when I first started, it was like, oh, you could just be an archaeologist. You go dig, you interpret. But that's not how it is now. Now you have to be an archaeologist plus have some kind of technical skill. It's like, how do I get that plus?
So what would you say?
Archaeologists, and I do GIS, archaeologists and ceramicists, archaeologists, and, you know, so how do you get that additional scientific training? You know, archaeologists or, you know, Egyptologists and a pigographer.
Can you
Egyptologists and digital reconstruction. You got a hard enough time just trying to get through, getting to be the Egyptologist or the archaeologist. Now I have to try to explore to find out how I can get some technical,
some additional training. Yeah.
Right. So those are the things that we've struggled with and still struggling with. But knowing the struggles, we felt that if we came together and start building pathways and laying out what the steps are, then those that come behind us won't have to deal with all of the struggles and the obstacles that we've had to encounter.
What are those pathways right now? Like, what are some of the like technical things? I know as like being in some of those conversations, but could you share a little bit with our audience? Like, what are you all planning?
So right now, and it's on the website, we have 2 projects that we're planning. You know, that we have the pandemic. There's also, I mean, this is all at the very beginning stages. So we have to go through the process of becoming a nonprofit so we can start you know, writing grants to get funding. But we want to develop a field school so that you want to learn how to excavate. Here's excavation. Because again, like I said, most HBCUs do not have anthropology departments or programs at all. So if a student is interested in they may not even know that they're interested in archaeology because they've never seen it. You know, so part of it is exposure.
Mm-hmm.
So exposing undergraduate students to these experiences so that some of them may actually decide, I would like to be an archaeologist.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of the archaeologists that we have, Howard used to have an anthropology department, Howard University, but they closed that down over 10 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're closing down their classics department, which is another loss. It's a major loss on so many levels. But so students that are attending HBCUs are being locked out of certain types of career options.
Careers and experiences, and
yeah, so they may not even know that this is an option for them when they apply to graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
And with the graduate schools, a lot of graduate programs are paring down. And, ever since the recession that we had, there's less money. So there are fewer students in cohorts. So, there's this push to make sure that they're funding all the students in the cohorts. But how do you make yourself appealing as a candidate for one of these slots if you've never even had any experience in this field? So it's more, again, like I said, it's more than just access. There are real things, real considerations that that go into creating this diversity. So we want to make sure that access is open, not to students at just select places, but more generally and more broadly. So that's one. And the other is that we're going to try to have a language school for the summer. So that's in the offings for next summer.
Okay. Awesome. We are definitely excited about those initiatives. And kind of following up, we have I'm just going to throw it out there now because we have like 15 minutes. We have a question in the chat. It kind of follows up with talking about training and things. This is a question for both of us. Do you think fostering an interest in archaeology should begin in high school, and what would that look like? And I love that question. If you don't mind, Deb, I'll give it a go first.
Okay.
Okay. As an archaeology educator, yes, I think it should even start earlier on with the work we do at Archaeology in the community. We work with 7 to 12-year-olds mainly as our sweet spot, but we introduce them to archaeological concepts through informal education, hands-on learning, activities, and all these fun things to get them interested in ancient history early. And it works really well because even thinking about a middle school curriculum, they're working on ancient history during this time. And this is also something me and Deb can talk a little bit more as well, because AITC has partnered with ASOR to do this fabulous project where we're building learning education resources for middle school and high school students. And I think it's important to increase that exposure early, get them interested, get them locked in at a very young age. And I think giving them that strong foundation will allow them to kind of maintain that interest and know that this is actually a career option. This is feasible, this is exciting, like there are so many things left to explore, and then that will push them into actually pursuing these careers by the time they get to college. And so then you don't have professors like looking at like, how am I going to fill my department? Because you already have the babies that are interested in it because they've already been exposed to it. Deb, could you share a little bit more about your experience?
So I will say when I was at Temple getting in anthropology, we had a summer field school, and our field school also included some school teachers. So we had, I do know like this one school teacher, she was there the whole time that we were out excavating. But we also had a couple of students. I think they were like middle school students. Their father would bring them, but they participated as well. They weren't there every day, but I mean, they got to come, for a few sessions. And so I think that that's really important and critical that, and that's not something just for, you know, like the Hansberry Society. I think that universities that have, you know, archaeological field schools or field sites, you know, they should be opening up, you know, some part of it to the community for people to come out to see what they're doing, but also to participate.
Absolutely. I've also been on like similar digs where we would have like community days and have community members, children come out to the sites, and it gives them, like you said, a very hands-on and firsthand experience. And that's really what AITC hones in on, and that's our specialty, is like we're doing hands-on. We make sure everything is very tactile experience. Archaeology is an embodied experience. So we talk about like, how are we putting this in our body? How does it feel? I'm a kinesthetic learner. I'm a dancer. All these other things come into being what archaeology feels like. And exposing that to kids early, I think is really important.
Yeah, and the exposure, because you don't know who you're exposing, right? That kid that, you know, that just is just drawn, that would never have been able to have any connection to an archaeological site, might be the one that, you know, becomes the next famous Africanist archaeologist. You just don't know. But if you, that's the reason why you have to just open it up, like I said, more broadly. You have to make sure that as many people as possible, you know, have the opportunity to try to access it. Because if you limit this to just students that have, you know, that have archaeology programs in their schools, you know, the undergraduates, you lose out on so many other students that never get that opportunity, have never even, you know, imagined it. I mean, me, that's me. I never imagined that I would be going on digs in the Sudan. You know, I wanted to be a lawyer, have my house, my Jaguar, and my 2.5 kids, you know.
A dream.
And life just showed me something
else
different while I was in law school. Like that dream just evaporated and another started to come into existence. So yeah, so you just don't know, and you don't want to cut off that opportunity from somebody that might be able to use it.
Thank you. We have another question. Also, everyone, please, when you're putting your questions, use the question and answer function as opposed to the chat. So they go through in this one thing. But the next one is, this one's for you, Deb. If you could leave to direct a field school tomorrow, where would it be located? And what questions would you be trying to answer? So this, I guess this kind of goes into the Hansberry Field School, but maybe not.
Yeah. Oh, wow. If I could, well, first of all, I would take my excavation to one of my 4 temple sites. There's a part of my dissertation. So that's where we would go. Because one of the questions that I'm interested in with my dissertation is starting to move toward regional analyses of complexes. So we've been looking at temples in isolation, temple sites, complexes, and I'm ready to start looking at regions. So, you know, regional analysis of Napatan Amun temples, a regional analysis of, you know, epidemic temples in the Bhutana. So that's where I would be kind of focusing on, you know, if it was mine.
This is my own follow-up question. When you say regional analysis, so kind of understanding how the temples in certain areas were like working together, or like the differences, the things the same, or?
Yes, because in these regions, you have quite a few temples that are in close proximity to each other. And that, I mean, people weren't going to the temples like they were going to church. I'm from the South, and there's churches on every other corner.
Yeah.
And, you know, various denominations, you know, we church going people. So people weren't going to the temples on a weekly basis, so what was the purpose of these temples? So you have they're complexes, though it's just not a temple. There are administrative buildings around. For the larger temples, there's also a palace. So looking at how these temples, what are the functions of these different temples? You got Jebel Barka, which is the largest temple, in Nubia. And within eyeshot, there's another temple, Sanam, right upriver. And it's another Amun temple. Why?
Wow.
What's the purpose? Taharqa built that temple. Taharqa built onto that temple. Why? There has to be a reason. So I'm interested in the regional analysis of the functions of these complexes. Yeah.
Thank you. My next question would be, let me check to make sure we don't have any in the chat. Oh, this one's a me one. Can you share a little bit about why it's important to talk about ancient Egypt and Nubia within the context of like classical or ancient Near Eastern studies, if people have questions or like why that would be a thing? Yeah.
Well, first, the Near East is a construct. The Near East is something that was formed by historians or ancient studies scholars to look at these different civilizations together collectively. That has never been a problem for Egypt. The problem has always been looking at Egypt in an African context. So that is where we need to start situating it. But I think that the other part of that is that there's too much emphasis on civilizations. So I like Chris Ehret's work. Chris Ehret works in Africa. He's a linguist, but he also deals with like pulling in the archaeology and the history to create a more holistic look at these cultures. And I would advise anybody to look at his 2018 Du Bois lecture. He did the Du Bois lectures at Harvard, so they're on YouTube. But Chris Ehret looks at the term civilization in his book, The Civilizations of Africa, and redefines what civilization means. And so there's been this look towards, these societies that build these grand monuments that have writing, they have administrative structures. But when you focus on that, you lose something. You lose just looking at societies in general, but you also lose the formative aspects of it and how these societies interact with other societies that are not at that grandiose level. And when I say interact, I don't mean as oppressors or conquerors, because that's how Egyptologists looked at Nubia initially. When they first started examining Nubia, they only studied Nubia to find out the ways that it served Egypt, because it was seen as subservient or a colony, or just having a colonized history. So I think that we have to start looking at how societies function in the ancient world. That's how you put all of those in context, in conversation with each other, looking at them as societies and how they function in the ancient world, and not being concerned with the ancient Near East construct or the Egyptian construct. These are societies within a larger ancient world. So how are they interacting with each other? But also how are they interacting just within their own geography? So again, looking at Egypt, how it's relating to not only Nubia, but there's Ethiopia a little further south. There are societies that are, to the west. We have not really actually studied the relationship of Western African kingdoms and societies, the trade with them, between them and Egypt, between them and Nubia, between them and Ethiopia. those are things that need to be explored, but we can only do that when we start situating these societies within, their geographical context.
I just looked at the time and did not realize that we are right at 3:30. I don't know where the time went. Cindy, is it okay if I ask one more question or just?
Absolutely, go for it.
The last one would just be, how do you see organizations like ASOR supporting your work, supporting the work of the Hansberry Society, and just the study of ancient African history in general?
So I think that organizations like ASOR are critical because they have the resources, not just the financial resources, but also the resources in people, because part of what is needed is mentorship. Like people who are already doing the work, advising, because I mentioned, how do you get those critical skills? Well, if you have people that are engaged in that type of work, opening up themselves to, answering questions, being a guide or a mentor, that is helpful, that's critical. Having access to excavations, all of those things are critical. And so I think that organizations like ASOR can be helpful in helping us to accomplish those goals if people are willing to open themselves up and their excavations up to these people or to students who need those opportunities.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a pleasure. Thank you so much, Debora, for taking the time to talk with me.
Oh, thank you. And thank ASOR for inviting us to be here.
Thank you, ASOR.
Well, thank you, Debora and Sydney. I really appreciate that wonderful interaction. That was so illuminating. Thank you so much. So thank you to all of you for joining us today and for the great questions. And thanks again to all of our speakers and our sponsors as well. Remember, we are only 28,500. Let me get back to that real quick. Sorry about that. We are only 28,500 away from our total goal, but only 178 away from the next milestone of 13,500 raised for this event. That's not much money at all. So please keep sharing the news about this event and the cause with your friends. Anyone can donate at any point during the weekend to get access through Zoom. We will start tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, and we hope to see you all there.